feedback here. Okay, it looks as though everything is working. It may or may not be. This is the College Prep English class for homeschoolers at Excellence in Education. Let's go ahead and share the screen. And
Who's that ugly guy in that picture?
oh yeah. Okay, screen sharing. That's just screen we can aim at. Okay, here we go. We're up and going. Okay, our agenda. Let's go over to our agenda page. And first of all, does anybody have any questions, suggestions, comments, criticisms on what we've been working on? Azariah has handed something in. I'm hoping he's going to be here so we can look at it.
Yeah. No, I think we're all good.
Okay, I feel like saying this, but in his absence, it doesn't make much sense. I ask everybody, please hand them in before Wednesday so I get a chance to look at them. But I did get to his. Okay, we've got a number of things to lined up here, and some of them I have added since this was posted. So in other words, it may not have gone into your mailboxes.
Yeah.
Specifically, we have the University of the People page. I talked about that last time, and here I'm asking you, take a look at it and see whether it might just suit you.
Yeah.
Its biggest problem, aside from the fact that it's online, is that it's only got 2 majors.
Yeah.
Now, if you're interested in business or computer science, it might be an ideal way to go.
Yeah.
And so
Is it bad that it's like an online college? Are those frowned upon? Or
No, it's just not. Actually, that's not really the case anymore because there's so many online colleges, and so many traditional colleges are doing their stuff online. But it's difficult for a student in isolation to work entirely online, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
That can be hard. My suggestion is, and I really think, where's Martin? I really think that we ought to, perhaps if there are a few people interested in that, in studying online, put together an online study support group. And specifically, if it's something like University of the People, where everybody will be essentially taking the same classes, after all, it's relatively limited range of classes, that would be ideal.
That
we
would
could
be.
actually.
Is everybody studying the same material and like
Exactly, and we can put together and find lectures on the specific subjects and trade information and so forth. So anyway, I thought that would be useful, given that higher education is really become inaccessible.
Yeah.
In so many ways, and that's so disturbing because it is so valuable. One of the points I try to make in here is that the education, the ability to learn things, to go out and study things and research and figure out what's going on in the world does not have to come from an institution. You have all of the capabilities of doing that yourselves. And so you may not get the piece of paper, but the piece of paper is not worth that much anymore either. It's losing its value in a lot of ways. Anyway, let's go on and look at that. We have another point I wanted to make, a little one, is that one of our students in this class is overshot an A by a couple of papers, and I think this is a wonderful thing, not just in itself, but because it gives me an opportunity, if I end up writing a letter of recommendation, to have something really serious to say. And so please think about that and do something that allows one to. We're going to be looking at this lady here, Tiffany Stinson is her name. And indeed, her essay won her entrance into 5 Ivy League universities and Stanford, which is not apparently. And the important thing here, of course, to understand is that it's not just the essay that did it. She's been the top of her class for several years, all kinds of extracurricular activities, and she's likely to be valedictorian. And so there's other extenuating material there. This, however, I think we have to look at it in the context of homeschooling and understand that if you go to a traditional school, in a way you're at a significant disadvantage because there is only one valedictorian per year.
Mhm.
And if those who aren't it end up having it in their records that indeed they weren't and exactly where they were, we're sort of an unknown quantity as homeschoolers.
Yeah.
But if you were, for example, to publish something, even to publish something academic, that would draw an immense distinction between you and all of the other applicants. So that sort of thing is worth remembering. Also, the content of this essay, I want to look at it in rather closely. I'm hoping that the others don't miss out on this. Allows one to bring in all kinds of other interesting material into the discussion. And Tiffany here managed to bring in a lot of interesting things, discussing things, for example, with her parents, ruminating on the nature of free will, for example.
Mhm.
And those are wonderful. They're not things you're likely to encounter in public school to any great extent, but you, as homeschoolers, can of course take that home and say, okay, we want to discuss existentialism this evening, or we want to discuss the ramifications of the Roman Empire, and indeed empire building, and or any of so many different subjects that might be of interest to you. And have these subjects at your disposal when you suddenly find yourself with a paper in front of you, a piece of paper in front of you, and a pencil, and you're expected to write on something. Have them available, as indeed she did. And so this, I think, was one of the things that made her essay so effective. So what I'd like to do is bring that up and talk about it a little bit. I'm assuming that looking there would be the best place. By the way, I brought this thing up last week and then forgot to post it for you.
Oh, yeah,
So
that's right.
I posted it in the classroom, but didn't put it in the agenda.
Mm.
So make sure to know all of these, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's another essay. Here we are. And okay, let's look at this. This young lady wrote this essay and put a lot of interesting things into it, which I think are worth understanding, as are the comments that were made on the essay by various generally retired or former admissions officers.
Mhm.
I don't think that part of it is really very good, because if you look at it closely, you find that one admissions officer dominates most of the comments, and the others are just a single paragraph each. And the one who dominates makes a major grammatical error. And one has to stop and ask oneself, does that endorse the use of grammatical errors in this kind of thing?
Yeah.
So it is a question, because it's not that important. Grammatical errors are not that important. Stinson, in fact, makes at least a couple, at least stylistic errors, and I'd like to look at those. Okay, let's look at this. Here's the prompt. Some students have a background, identity, interest, or talent that is so meaningful they believe their application would be incomplete without it. If this sounds like you, then please share your story. This is a really wide open prompt.
Yeah.
You could write anything you like, and that's what she did. And notice how she starts it. This is a ploy. It's perhaps even a somewhat hackneyed ploy, starting right in the middle of something without any explanation. Managing to break free from my mother's grasp, I charged with arms flailing and chubby legs fluttering beneath it. Do chubby legs flutter?
No.
Okay, but you can be creative with your use of verbs and see what you can come up with. I was the ferocious 2-year-old rampaging through Costco on a Saturday morning. My mother's eyes widened in horror as I jettisoned my churro. The cinnamon sugar rocket gracefully sliced its way through the air while I continued my spree. Now, this makes me stop and ask you, of course, look at these vocabulary terms.
Yeah.
There's not one word there you don't know.
But she uses a lot of detail. and
Absolutely.
adjectives.
Wonderful detail just comes into everything she's saying. Now, this is one of the important aspects of vocabulary. I looked all over for my chart, but it didn't seem to make the trip from the old classroom. That chart shows a little tiny circle of everyday vocabulary you would expect everyone to use, and then a vast circle around it of vocabulary just about everybody understands, but tends to be beyond their active vocabulary, tends not to be part of their usual everyday usage. And beyond that, of course, is the vocabulary which expands, which is absolutely immense in the English language, that goes on to include so many things that most people reading, or many people reading it, would not know them. Now, that's still a valid place to go when you're writing for admissions officers, I feel. Stinson doesn't go there, and probably it's unnecessary to. But if you listen, for example, to the lectures that I've been assigning you, you will find that they do comfortably and consistently use words that are outside the realm of the average American understanding. And there's so much of that we've got to get through today. Let's take a look at this. Okay, so she's made up a few words which are nice. Cinnamon sugar, stuck it together and made a word. It doesn't hurt anything. To jettison a churro, does a churro slice through the air? It's not exactly the device that slices, but you see this image that she's trying to create, and effectively does creates an impression. I sprinted through the aisles, looking in awe at the massive bulk products that towered over me. Overcome with wonder, I wanted to touch and taste, to stick my head into industrialized freezers. Industrial-sized freezers, I'm sorry, to explore every crevice. Now notice that she is using verbs, different verbs. It's not just that I saw this and I went there. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
And we can, those are easily enough done. You can create a collection of them. Overcome with wonder, I wondered, okay, let's see. I was a conquistador. We have a metaphor here. It's not, I was like a conquistador. If you said that, it would be a simile. But I was a conquistador, but rather than searching for the land for El Dorado, I scoured aisles for free samples before inevitably being whisked away into a shopping cart. I scaled a mountain of plush toys and surveyed the expanse that lay before me, the kingdom of Costco. All right. The Costco is just a theme that runs through this thing. I recommend to you coming up with some similar kinds of themes. I don't mean department stores necessarily. You could easily do the same thing with Wikipedia or Wikimedia or any of a number of other databases through which will lead you from one idea to another, especially if it's a link to another. I think that might be a very fine theme. But in here, we're playing with Costco. We have this, this metaphor she uses, which indicates that she's been doing some reading. She knows a little bit about the early American explorers, and uses it as a metaphor here. Create a collection of metaphors that you could use. Okay, notorious for its oversized portion and $1.50 hot dog combo, Notice another created word here.
Mhm.
Costco is the apex of consumerism, the zenith of consumerism, absolutely. From the days spent toted around, not just carried around, but toted around in a shopping cart, to when I was finally tall enough to reach lofty sample trays, Costco has endured a steady presence throughout my life. This is clearly a stylistic error. It has endured throughout my life, works fine, but you don't endure a presence. You endure hardships. You see what I mean?
Mhm.
Endure does not mean that. It is not normally used in that context. This is a stylistic error, which none of the commenters said anything about. Costco has endured a steady presence throughout my life. Clearly doesn't work. If you
Yeah.
search for endure, you won't find it used that way. You don't endure a presence, you endure a hardship, you endure a problem. As a veteran Costco shopper, I navigate the aisles of foodstuffs, thrusting the majority of my weight upon a generously filled shopping cart whose enormity juxtaposes my small frame. Another stylistic error here. The word juxtapose is a transitive verb, but it's every example I've been able to find anywhere, and I looked for quite a few to see if I could see an example of this, is I juxtapose these two things together. We don't say that this one juxtaposes that one. They are juxtaposed together, they are in juxtaposition to each other, but you juxtapose one with the other rather than this one juxtaposes that one. That's not the way it's used. And it's understandable that way, but it's a stylistic error, not a grammar error. Over time, I've developed a habit of observing fellow patrons tote, notice she's overusing this word perhaps,
Yeah.
used it already,
Twice.
their carts piled with frozen burritos, cheese puffs, tubs of ice cream, and weight loss supplements. That is clever, isn't
Yeah.
it? That is really delightful. Very insightful. Perusing the aisles gave me time to ponder. Who needs 3 pounds of sour cream? Was cultured yogurt any more well-mannered than its uncultured counterpart? Costco gave birth to my unfettered curiosity. Have you ever used the word unfettered?
Oh, I don't think so.
I don't think so. I've heard of it most definitely.
It's definitely one to know. What is a fetter? It's a manacle. It's a jive, if you'd like, Gyve, lots of words for it, basically handcuffs.
So basically, an unhandcuffed curiosity.
Right. Untethered, if you'd like, unrestrained. Okay, cultured yogurt, of course you understand what's going on here. She's doing a paranomasis is what you might call it. You've never heard that word. It means a pun. She is using the two meanings of the word culture, in that culture can mean the culture of a society, and indeed the higher level of culture of a society. But in this case, we're talking about a bacterial culture that's introduced into yogurt, and she's doing a play on words. But paronomastic reference. Okay, you're getting that one down, right? Now that's a word that if you used here, you would be sending your admissions officer to the dictionary with, but that's not necessarily a bad thing to do.
Yeah.
While enjoying an obligatory hot dog, notice the word obligatory, exactly. I did not find myself thinking about the all beef goodness that Costco boasted. I instead considered the finitudes and infinitudes, imagined uses for tubs of sour cream, the projectile motion of said tub when launched from an 80-foot shelf, or maybe when pushed from a speedy cart by a scrawny 17-year-old. Add detail. all kinds of wonderful, not just push from a scrawny cart, but buy a from a cart, but buy a scrawny 17-year-old. You see what I mean?
Mhm.
Now, one person who does this kind of narrative splendidly is Garrison Keillor. You ever heard of him?
Don't believe so.
Remind me to introduce you to it. He's an American writer, specifically a radio personality. He's been doing a radio show for decades, a radio show every week. And in every one of those programs, he stops and gives you the news from Lake Wobegon, which is a narrative, unscripted. He's obviously got it figured out ahead of time, but he doesn't use a script. He sits on a stool. There are films of this as well as radio. Sits on a stool with a spotlight and a microphone and tells a story, and absolutely brilliantly. The level of his prose is very American, and it tends not to rise to the level of what we're studying necessarily. But his use of detail is absolutely wonderful. You never leave something unqualified, undescribed. Okay, so here her mind is wandering. And this is something you can put into anything. My mind suddenly started to ponder over the fact that at one point we didn't know whether it was a closed universe, but now it seems to be clear that it's not. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Your knowledge of that kind of thing could be brought in and applied here. Okay, let's see. Yeah, we're talking about the trajectory. And in fact, you might have said something about the parabolic trajectory, if you know what is going on there. I contemplated the philosophical. If there exists a 33-ounce jar of Nutella, do we really have free will? Well, this doesn't make an awful lot of sense.
Yeah, I didn't
it doesn't
get that.
really matter that it makes a lot of sense. The fact that she is pondering whether or not we have free will is in itself an indication that she has been doing some reading and thinking. I experienced a harsh physics lesson while observing a shopper who had no evident familiarity of inertia's workings. You don't have familiarity of so much as you have familiarity with, which would have been better here. With a cart filled to overflowing, she made her way towards the sloped exit, continuing to push and push while steadily losing control until the cart escaped her and went crashing into a concrete column, 52-inch plasma screen and all. So use all of the detail in there, including the exact measurement. Whether it's true or not doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Purchasing the Yuletide hickory smoked ham inevitably led to the conversation. This is important, and this is something you as homeschoolers really should be doing and thinking about. What's happened here is she's making a connection with this Yuletide hickory smoked ham and the fact that Andrew Jackson's nickname was Old Hickory. And so this is leading them off, as your homeschool dinner conversations should, into some realm of history, some realm of science, some realm of philosophy or art that you can discuss with your parents, and indeed probably do. Make a note of these, because indeed, as homeschoolers, someone reading your essay is going to be aware of the fact that you are learning from your parents. Give your parents a good report. Okay, led to a conversation by my father and me. Notice she gets this right. It's not by my father and I, which an awful lot of people get wrong, about Andrew Jackson's controversiality. There was no questioning Old Hickory's dedication. He was steadfast in his beliefs and pursuits, qualities I'm compelled to admire, yet his morals were crooked. We both found the ham to be more likable and tender. Delightful little simile there, comparing the ham to this historical figure.
Mhm.
I adopted my exploratory skills, fine-tuned by Costco. Now here she's extrapolating upon what she's just been talking about, and saying how this applies to her as a human being and her inquisitive nature and so forth. Fine-tuned by Costco toward my intellectual endeavors. Just as I sampled buffalo chicken dip or chocolate truffles, I probed the realms of history, dance, and biology, all in pursuit of the ideal, cart one overflowing with theoretical situations and notions, both silly and serious. I sampled calculus, cross-country running, scientific research, all of which are now household favorites. Grab that sentence. Never steal somebody else's words, but think about that one for a moment. She's got a list of calculus, cross-country running, scientific research, all of which became household favorites. That doesn't happen very often in public school, but presumably you folks have that sort of thing happen all the time in your homeschooling. They become household favorites, and now for a while you do nothing but talk about the probabilistic combinatorics of rolling dice, or you see what I mean,
Yeah.
or playing cards. Okay. Whether it be through attempting aerial yoga, learning how to chart black body radiation using astronomical software, or dancing in front of hundreds of people, I am compelled to try any activity that interests me in the slightest. Okay. This is her character note. And this is so important, they keep on talking about this, all of the admissions officers, the character notes. Show us why we would want to meet you, why we think that you would be a good candidate. Okay, and then you've got to have something winding it up. Now listen to this one. My intense desire to know, to explore beyond the bounds of rational thought. This is what defines me. Here she's putting down her character note clearly. Costco fuels my insatiability and cultivates curiosity within me at a cellular level. It's not literal, but it's a very interesting way to describe it. Encoded to immerse myself in the unknown, I find it difficult to complacently accept, notice the split infinitive that nobody cares about, to complacently accept the what. I find it difficult to complacency accept the what. I want to hunt for the whys and dissect the hows. In essence, I subsist on discovery. Subsist. Wonderful word.
What is that word?
You know what rang to my mind when I read the very end of that? It just reminded me so much of that letter that we looked at a week or two ago from this Major Bush, who says, I twitch with an urge for the folly of intrusion. If you can put words together like that, creating that kind of an image, and I feel that's almost what she was successful in doing here. In essence, I subsist on discovery. Okay, any questions on this?
One quick question. Where was it where she said my father and me?
Let's see, when we were talking about Andrew Jackson, right there.
Oh, how can you tell if you should put my father and me or my father and I?
You folks know that very well, but I'll explain it very clearly here. Between is a preposition. Both of these, my father and me, are objects of that preposition. And so you never say between we, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
Between he and I, oh, absolutely terrible. It's between us or between him and me. Now, between is a preposition that requires two things afterwards because you can't be between one thing.
Yeah.
But if you were to take any other preposition, on, off, toward, you wouldn't say toward I. Toward him and I.
Mhm.
You see what I mean?
Yeah.
You've got to make sure that
Okay.
the pronoun here agrees with the fact that you know your object of the preposition. It could be the object of a verb too. It could be the direct object. Okay.
Right.
Nice thing. Now we have this commentary on it. I'm sure you folks have read the commentary. Some of it, I think, makes a certain amount of sense. He starts here, this in media res, which, well, that's fine. Media res. Basically what they're saying, that this is a writing device that's intended as a hook to engross your reader. She's starting right in the middle of something
Mhm.
without explaining how she got there. I loosed my hand and charged through and so forth. And so he likes that. And now much of this is written by this fellow, Nelson Urnania. No, notice that it's misspelled in one of those places. I'm not sure which one.
Yeah.
Urania or
Yeah,
Urnania.
Somebody's wrong here.
Yeah. Okay, so, and then he said, plush toys and survey the expanse that lay before the kingdom of Costco. All right. And he's apparently in this mentor verse, which might be interesting to check out. Mentor verse is basically an online system for helping people get applications in.
Mm.
Okay, a number of these are mentioned here. I'm sure you have read them, and if you have any questions about them, I'd be glad to look at them. One of the points they're making here is, after reading this, I want to know more about this inquisitive, witty, astute, and eloquent young woman. And indeed, I think that essay makes it very clear that she is all of those things.
Mhm.
Her eloquence is lumpy and unpolished, if you'd like. She has little lapses of stylistic sophistication, let's put it that way. Now, notice the choice of words here. Notorious, where I don't know that necessarily deserves notoriety. It certainly deserves distinction, perhaps. And then this 3 pounds of sour cream. This personal statement is not just an essay. It is visual. I can see the 3-pound tub of sour cream. And she's describing things with wonderful detail there. And then this comment on free will, the fact that she is indeed ruminating on, considering questions like that. Okay, and then the one that I think is important here, where is that? Oh, you know what? I think I have to reload this page because I put some more stuff in it probably after I put the page on. Okay, now what happens here, here is Urania. I presume that is the correct spelling and not that one up there, or not the one that we saw previously.
Mhm.
I also noticed the strong verbs Brittany uses. Very good. He widened, sliced, sprinted, touch, taste, stick, explore, scour, whisk, scaled. Now, none of these are words you don't know. I'm sure you could all, at this point, add to that list, perhaps a few that would even put the reader on his heels a bit. But you don't have to. It's just nice to have those at your disposal. Personally, I would advise Brittany to use less adjectives. You do hear what's wrong with that, right?
What's wrong with this commentary?
What's wrong with that sentence?
Oh,
To use less adjectives.
that's the plural. The count noun.
Right.
Yes.
Got it. Mass noun, count noun problem.
Mass noun,
Indeed.
count noun.
Adjective is a count noun, and less is used only with mass nouns.
Mhm.
And it's a minor error. A lot of people
Yeah.
would say it's a minor error. They do it in checkout lines all the time in the supermarket, 5 items or less or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But here's the usage note from the dictionary. The traditional rule holds that fewer should be used for things that can be counted, fewer than 4 players, while less should be used with mass nouns for things of measurable extent, less paper, less than a gallon of paint. The usage panel largely supports the traditional rule. Okay, so in other words, we have an admissions officer who is breaking rather flagrantly a rule which may not be all that important
By
in the
trying
long
to
term,
correct her.
but it's there. Now, what does this mean to us? Well, it does seem that an awful lot of rules tend to be broken here.
Mhm.
Stinson does not break any grammatical rules. She does, however, in at least 3 places, do something that's stylistically questionable. This is a grammatical rule that he is breaking. Okay. When it comes to appealing to this kind of person, I think it's important to understand that it's difficult to figure out exactly what your target is. If you're really aiming at someone who is a master of language, then at least you know where you're going. If you're aiming at somebody like this, it's sort of a moving target because their English isn't that good in the first place, and their commentary is not particularly remarkable in its prose style. And so I think Stinson's paper is really very good, except, she's got a rough edges here and there. She writes much better than the commenters do. So this takes us to something else, which I think need to look at. Okay, let's see. Yeah, with this reading one, I really want to give you this reading one. In fact, I think I intended to do that one first before talking about Stinson. But let's go and look at that. I think I've got it up here somewhere. And I want to look at that one, but I won't click the whole thing on it. Here we are, Eagleton. I've been reading this book, not all the way through yet, but it is so delicious. His use of language is simply superb. And I pulled out, you've all read this little part here, have you?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, let's just look at it if you don't mind.
Okay.
Feel free to read the entire work. Again, it's, I couldn't find a link to anywhere that it's online. It's not anything popular, anything really popular. Somebody's put it up in India or Pakistan or something. But he's not quite popular enough for that. Okay, American English can sometimes sound oddly informal to the British, and at other times too straight-laced and well upholstered. What a wonderful description there. The United States is the abode of opaque academic jargon, but also of the raw, racy, and in-your-face. It finds it hard to evolve a kind of language which is both easy and elegant. It sometimes suspects wrongly that to be clear, you have to be plain, and that to be stylish is to be effete. We can appeal to de Tocqueville once more, who notes that American usage is clear and dry without the slightest ornament, but that it quickly turns pompous and bombastic when its speakers attempt a more poetic style. This is absolutely true. It's quite amazing. When this happens, he remarks, Americans can never say anything simply, which is true of their pretentious business or academic jargon today. Bombast, one might claim, is the flip side of an excessive plainness. It is the rhetorical mode of those who are accustomed to unadorned prose. The portentous solemnity. Okay, and in this one, it's interesting. Let me just throw this in. He's talking about being scripted. There are too many tales of literary decline, too many premature obituary notices for the novel, too much traditionalist nostalgia for a golden age of letters. Even so, it's hard to feel that the culture of the word has taken something. It's hard not to feel the culture of the word has taken something of a nosedive in today's United States. Same is true of Britain, but to a lesser degree. There is a British television show in which panelists engage in superbly witty exchanges and surreal flights of comic fancy without a single word being scripted. On American TV, by contrast, it's impossible to say hey or wow without the aid of an auto cue. Not really true, all of those reality programs that are on now did not be scripted. But he doesn't say it here, but I'm almost certain, say 90% certain, that I know what that program is that he's referring to. And it is indeed a delightful one. It's called QI, which stands for Quite Interesting, in which the question setter, an omniscient character who really has all the answers, not just to the questions, but to anything else that comes up, presents questions to which nobody knows the answer, and they are graded as to whether their answers are interesting or not necessarily whether they're true or not. Have you seen it?
No, that sounds really cool though.
I don't recommend it. At least if you decide to hunt it out and look at it, make sure you tell your parents that I don't recommend it.
Okay.
Okay. The master of ceremonies is Stephen Fry.
Oh, I see.
And you will find that it runs off into his predilections a good deal more than. But it's a fascinating thing, and it's interesting that he comments on it here. Some U.S. academics deliver their papers at conferences as though they're translating from the Sanskrit as they go along. I shared this with a friend of mine yesterday who teaches Sanskrit and did a Sanskrit degree in Harvard. They have a Sanskrit PhD program at Harvard. And he took serious exception to this. He doesn't know what he's talking about. The British used to be very good at Sanskrit, and now, of course, the Americans have taken over. Anyway, columns in upmarket British newspapers can be intricate and inventive, whereas equivalent pieces in the United States or in the States tend to be sparse, thinly textured, and lexically challenged. What does that mean?
Let's see. The stuff in the U.S. is not very.
Up to par with other
Or
countries.
the words aren't that great. They're more simplified.
Actually, lexically challenged, you're absolutely right. That's where it is. Lexically, we're talking here about the lexile levels. We talked about that before. But indeed, the use of language, the use of words. An editorial in British newspapers can be a literary tour de force, which is hardly ever true across the Atlantic. Some of the most reverend national commentators in the United States write basic, colorless, crudely utilitarian prose. No decent piece of writing simply tells it like it is without essential delight in the way of telling it. When have you heard that before?
With the other news reporter, wasn't it Frisk?
Right, absolutely.
Yes.
Good for you, Robert Fisk. He said almost exactly the same thing when he was talking to journalists. Okay. Now, this one I found interesting. Generally speaking, American students are a delight to teach, yet they are not always able to voice a coherent English sentence, even at graduate level. Some of them are easy to mistake for Turks or Albanians who have just arrived in the country and are still struggling with the language. Only later does one realize they grew up in Boston. They tend to tie themselves up in great chains of unwieldy syntax, overlain with a liberal layer of jargon. Disheveled syntax is true of both genders, but jargon is confined largely to the men. This is part of the painful demise of the spoken word in the United States. Do you agree with him?
Yes.
I'm afraid I've been saying that for so long, and then suddenly I see him saying
you
it,
say.
and he says it so much better. Okay. Now this I found very interesting at the end. Very interesting. One of the finest exponents of the English language in the United States today has been the critic T.J. Clarke. Another is the late Christopher Hitchens. He makes fun of Christopher Hitchens when he disparages him and conflates him together with Richard Dawkins and calls them ditchkins. Right, but he has a great deal of respect for his use of language. And then he goes on to say both of them came to the country from England. It can be claimed that to write as well as this, with such tonal subtlety, verbal self-assurance, and exquisite play of light and shade, you need a well-established cultural tradition in your bones. That sounds terribly high-handed and is perhaps unfair, but is so often true, I'm afraid. Anyway, what I liked about this so much was not just his verification of my appreciation of Christopher Hitchens, but also T.J. Clarke, who has 2 lectures in our assignments now. Have you had a chance to look at those?
Oh, yeah, I've seen the first 10-minute one and the second 1-hour one.
I thought they were both fairly long, unfortunately, but it was interesting. I think his language is interesting, but of course he's talking about art criticism. And I'm afraid together with literary criticism, it's a strange field, isn't it? You can just babble on about anything you like. It doesn't have to have anything to do, certainly, with what the artist was thinking when he painted it, or anything else. It just, how this can go off and mean something. It's an interesting phenomenon. I feel that you can do the same thing with literary criticism, which of course is Eagleton's forte. Okay, back to our assignments. By the way, before I chew up our time with the things that I've been thinking about here and putting up there, is there anything specific that we need? Is one of you intending to do a long poetry recital or anything?
No, nothing special.
I don't believe so.
Okay, you handed in a rewrite.
Yes.
And I'm assuming you don't need me to say anything more about that.
I don't think so.
And I'm assuming it would probably be best to wait in hopes of Azariah's presence to go over his paper.
Do we have any viewers? Maybe he's watching.
Yeah.
Well, let's take a look here. No viewers. That's interesting because I think I'm also a viewer over here. Well, I guess I didn't actually start it. Okay, where are we now? Let's see. I'm really rather enthusiastic about this concept of university of the people. I think it would be wonderful to start a little sort of university. This is something that I found was very useful when I was at university. I lived in the dorm, and it doesn't have to be a dorm. You could easily have it on campus, something or other. But I lived in the dorm, and specifically, mine was a sort of special dorm in that it was a German-speaking dormitory. And we had, as a leader of the House, a native German speaker who was a PhD student in the German department. And she really made it possible to understand why one can really love learning. You have to, that's something that's hard to get from a classroom.
Yeah.
But when you're sitting around with somebody just really for the delight of it, discussing literature, discussing
It's very
thoughts,
different.
it's very different. And that's the sort of thing which I think could be created for, especially for homeschoolers studying in an online university. You could create at least that dorm type atmosphere of discussing the material. Okay, let's okay. That was Eagleton, and we've done Brittany Stinson. Okay. And one of the things I say here, of course, is we will discuss it this week, as we just did. But I'm asking you also to please create a checklist of critical factors to include in such an essay, based on this one and the many others you have read, and I'm sure you've read many. You've got all of these links to 100 successful essays here, for example. And a few that immediately come to my mind is we've got to have a theme, the hook, the content, and the conclusion. She uses Costco. I think that's rather a mundane thing to choose.
Yeah.
There are so many other things one could choose.
Yeah.
For example, an influential uncle, or a web page full of links. I mean, there's so many people blogging intelligently out there, and vastly larger number who are blogging unintelligently. But if you find something that's worthwhile, it can be worth following. So we've got to have the theme. Topics from history, science, and philosophy. Create a collection of these. What have we got in hers? We've got mention of the conquistadors searching for El Dorado. We've got mention of Old Hickory, Andrew Jackson.
Free will.
And absolutely, we've got the existence or non-existence of free will, and finity and infinite. That's interesting, because the word finity doesn't normally exist,
Yeah.
but infinity does, and she extrapolated from that. Which is, the word extrapolation was used in that essay, and I was thinking that we ought to get to that and look at it. Anyway, we'll see. Okay, so we want to create a collection of these that you could use in any essay that comes up. And perhaps to that end, it would be worthwhile just reading, for example, about classical literatures and Greek tragedy. And you've learned a good deal about a number of Shakespearean works. You can draw parallels between the debauchery of Sir Toby Belch and the devotion of the characters. There are all kinds of things you could bring into a story like that. Language, rhetorical devices, vocabulary, grammatical flaws. Now notice, I've said before, and I stand by this, that you've got to have grammatical flaws in it. She doesn't have any grammatical flaws as such, but she has a number of stylistic flaws, and they're probably essential. They're never mentioned in the commentary, and each one of these things is full of commentary. They never mention the stylistic flaws, or they may mention them in a negative way. But just based on the fact that every essay I've read has stylistic flaws in it, I'm assuming that they're essential. Just to demonstrate that it did not go through any kind of a professional editorial process. Rhetorical devices. We've talked about rhetorical devices, and there's so many of them you can draw upon, but she uses quite a few. For example, when you're doing something, do three things with three verbs. You see what I mean? Make it the sort of coordination list. That's by far the most common rhetorical device. And then there's so many others that can be used. What others do you folks have to add to this list?
Lots of details.
Yeah.
Wonderful,
Lots of fine
wonderful.
details,
Very
yeah.
good point. Very good point. Lots of detail, more detail than necessary.
Mhm.
I remember, well, Keeler is just so good at that. And the detail, some of it, you know that it's nonsense, but it doesn't matter. It's so beautifully well. One of the things he said in one of his stories was, well, when I was caught out by my parents and I was expected to provide some sort of an explanation, I wanted to make it a really good one. And so he would come up with a story, and you can't fault him on this. His story was absolutely marvelous. How can you punish a kid who can come up with a story like that? You see what I mean?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I hope you don't mind my inflicting this upon you. You have read it, right? You know what it's about.
I do not believe I came across that one.
Okay, let me throw that one up here. The Journalist and the Homeschooler. This was inspired by a lecture that Robert Fisk gave at University of California, Berkeley, a number of years ago. But in that one, he mentions this same major in Ramadi in Iraq. And he mentions his letter and he reads it. I was just surprised to see it arise again in his lecture in March this year. He did the same thing, he brought in this. And I appreciate the fact that he's done it. But the point, here I highlighted a couple of things here. Read the whole thing if you don't mind. Give me a little feedback on it if you'd like. This quotes from his, this author, and so this part you have heard quoted, and I've read it to you already. I don't need to read it again, but it's the one that ends with, "I do my best, but I twitch with an urge for the folly of intrusion."
Mhm.
And it's just beautifully done. And indeed, he gets applause having read this. And who would not applaud? The writer of this poignant passage does wield his words with a proficiency and grace which Fisk likens to that of Joseph Conrad, and in which any true fan of English writing would exult. However, Fisk staunchly refuses to use the internet.
Mhm.
And of course, it didn't take me long to figure out who it was. He didn't give the name in his original lecture. I had to figure out that. He does mention the name in the recent one. And so I was able to find it. How do you find something like that? Well, there's a trick to it. I feel like even pulling up something from the book here and reading it to you.
Okay.
Maybe if I can find that. You can probably read it yourself. But the fact is, most journalism is so banal and repetitive that if you had an article in front of you and wanted to find out whether it's out there online, I found myself in that position many times because I can't bring it into you in class if I only have it on paper.
Yeah.
And so I've often found myself trying to find something out there. But if you have a bit of okay. I'm sorry. Wish I knew exactly where I put it. If you have something that you can search by, you can put it in quotes and see if it exists somewhere.
Mhm.
The trouble is most writing is so unimaginative that there's nothing unique enough in it.
Yeah, so it just pops up everywhere.
Exactly. And so, okay, you've all read about what is correct language, right?
Mhm.
It actually tells you the answer. Right? What does it say?
What was it?
Was it in like the first chapter or something?
It's in the introduction, actually.
Yeah.
What it says is it's the language that conveys your message and also the impression that you want to convey to the audience you want to convey it to. That's the answer. And of
Mhm.
course, that's going to be a different language for different audiences and for different
Yes.
subject matter. You know, I feel bad about not being able to. There. Okay, I'm sorry. I could have. I will summarize, but please read it. It's worth reading, I think. If you're looking for something out there and you're trying to find something from an American a standard journalistic prose, it's often hard to find because it's just not unique enough. But if you're looking for something, for example, in the writings of someone good, I mentioned actually Christopher Hitchens in there,
Mhm.
that one article might contain dozens of phrases that exist nowhere else on the internet, unique phrases that can be searched. And of course, Bush's writing was a perfect example of that. It's good writing. Twitch with an urge for the folly of intrusion can't possibly exist anywhere else. The same is true of Stinson's writing. When you look at some of the things that she, you know,
that's
her
true.
chubby legs fluttering, you know, nobody else has ever
Yeah.
said that before. So that's one of the qualities of good writing, is to come up with novel and new and memorable ways to describe things that evoke images in the mind of your readers, which is something that was mentioned so many times by people reading this. So I was able, of course, to do a search online and find out what that phrase was, who wrote it, and then I was able to search around. As you folks know, you've learned how to do things on the internet and figure out who this guy was and who his father was. Now, my little paragraph here is, Fisk may be pardoned, and as unschooling flies under the radar. This uncharacteristic omission by Fisk is really perhaps quite excusable, in that the homeschooling factor is not included in nor regarded as a legitimate entry in one's resume. Particularly if it's informal and merely supplementary to one's official schooling. He may not have thought to research Bush's parentage and background, and may have felt that there was no reason to assume it to be relevant. It is not really Fisk's reporting that is his fault as much as the egregious and erroneous but widely propagated assumption that skills, particularly literary skills, particularly language skills, can only be acquired in a formal education environment. Notice that if you take that sentence, there must be several phrases in there that you could search and they would be utterly unique on the internet.
Yeah.
Okay, the extent to which Major Bush was influenced by his father is quite evident, not just in his writing, but also more clearly and inescapably in the presence of a parental relationship that would occasion the writing of such a considered and well-crafted letter. Indeed, this is not a father to whom a son would write the colloquial, malformed, disconnected ramblings so characteristic of informal American conversational language usage. These words, penned so eloquently for the elder Bush, reflect a standard of verbal communication common to father and son, a beauty of expression which is perhaps far better assimilated through the nurture of unschooling than through any number of formal lecture classes and seminars. Major Bush's sentences were finely and intricately sculpted for a reader whom he knew to be worthy and appreciative of them. Okay, you see my point there. And of course, I'm trying to produce prose that is worth reading, and the sort of thing that that Fisk is talking about. If you're going to read something, it makes sense if it really has some literary valued,
Mm-hmm.
which of course is exactly what Eagleton was also talking about. Any questions on that?
It's all pretty good.
You folks as homeschoolers have tremendous advantages. I don't
Yes.
know your homeschool environment specifically, but and your parents may not have a great deal of time, but when they do, take advantage of it. And if they don't know the subject matter, well, most parents, homeschooling parents, presumably make a point of doing a little research and finding out.
Yeah.
But even if they don't, you do the research and then dump it on them.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? The way my daughter described it, she went off straight to college, of course, and was doing the dual enrollment program here with the EIE. But she said it wasn't as though I was homeschooled. I taught myself, but I was shown how to teach myself. Okay, primary sources. Has anybody looked at any of these? Works of
Yeah.
Thomas Paine and Jefferson.
I scanned through them, yeah.
Uh-huh. That's probably the most important thing to do is scan through them and understand what they are.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to Orwell. I mean, everybody knows the stories, but they are terribly plodding to get through. I mean, Jefferson, most of his works, besides the obvious, are correspondence. Beautifully penned correspondence, but it's not the easiest material necessarily to understand. Thomas Paine wrote pamphlets, and we've got three of those. The big ones, the Common Sense, which was really behind the American Revolution, The Rights of Man, and The Age of Reason. All fascinating. Have you had a chance to look at what's in them?
Yeah, I've checked out each of those
Uh-huh.
links.
Just reading the Wikipedia articles, probably enough, but it's enough to let you know whether you want to sit down and read the rest of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's what I found.
Okay, then we've got the biographies. I threw these biographies up. Hitchens is more popular worldwide, really, than Eagleton, and as a result, those biographies are to be found out on the net. And of course, the way to do that is to look at the biography itself, find a unique phrase, and search it. Anyway, I was able to find all three linked and link to them. And the biographies, as I suggest here, are valuable for their eloquence.
Biographies are really good, actually, because he gives you like a rundown of like just who they are and what they're about and everything like that, and just kind of that whole deal.
Right. And also he does it so masterfully.
Mm-hmm.
And so just reading the biographies, in most cases, biographies are secondary sources.
Yeah.
But coming through Hitchens, they're an improvement, really, even on those brilliant originals.
Yeah.
Okay, and here, of course, I just learned about T.J. Clark from reading Eagleton. And so I did a search out there and found, sure enough, not a lot, but he has been doing some work, which is posted on YouTube.
Yeah.
And usually you can count on this happening for just about any author, because that publisher
So
is
much
going to send them
content
on a
on
lecture
YouTube,
tour.
Yeah.
And so that's wonderful to find that.
It's on the internet. It's most likely on YouTube. That's just how it works sometimes.
Yeah, it's going to get up there, and of course that's one of the best ways of promoting a book.
Definitely.
His books, however, unlike those of Hitchens, are not to be found anywhere that I've been able to find. I mean, you can go onto Amazon and get them, and perhaps it would be worth doing that. I haven't read them yet myself. But do landscapes have identities and art and poetry? The fanciful notions he runs off with interesting, fascinating. It's sometimes a little hard to justify. You mean this
In
is a
some
profession?
cases, yeah. In some cases, yeah. It's like this is an actual profession. It's fun.
Exactly. In fact, Eagleton says at one point he's in fear constantly of someone realizing that that he's actually being paid to read literature. It's sort of like being paid for sunbathing or something.
Uh-huh.
But anyway, it is interesting to listen to, and Clark's language is fascinating. What I found interesting was the poetry, and here I have to take some serious issue with the definition of poetry, perhaps. Because after all, the poetry that he's talking about, and indeed that which he recites, is unstructured poetry. It may have lineation, in other words, have lines of specific length, but of course you can't tell that when it's being recited. And it certainly doesn't have a recognizable scansion or rhyme scheme. So what distinguishes it from prose? And especially when you have someone whose prose is as magnificent as his is, there is no distinction as far as I can tell.
Mm-hmm.
And indeed, you listen to the prose of all of the greats that we're looking at here, and it could pass for poetry. As far as I'm concerned, it exceeds the level of most modern poetry, which tends often to be
Not that great.
that's not the way I would have put it, but that's exactly what I meant.
Yeah.
Yeah. At least I find it doesn't inspire me. It's wonderful to listen to what he's saying here, but I don't see how it differs from prose at all, because you can't tell the structure. It might as well just be an essay. Okay, and here, of course, is the Fisk lecture and the Eagleton lecture on Doctrines of Faith and Reason, which is superb, note by note, all the way through. You've all listened to that one, right?
Yes.
Good. Okay, I think we have exhausted everything that was new on here, and of course, the rest of this is just the biographies on the biographies page, and this weird thing down here, which I'm sure you've watched and enjoyed. Okay, it's a pity that we didn't have the others today, but I hope they get a chance to, and I hope this is recording.
Yeah.
We'll see. Let's decide, you folks, let's assume that you have the proxy votes of your colleagues, what we should jump into next. Notice that I put a lot of new things on here that you probably have to catch up with still. But reading and listening, what suggestions of directions that we might take?
I don't believe we actually covered the TED Talks today. And
Oh.
I thought those were great.
Correct.
Yeah, so
Wonderful. And indeed, there was, I did throw up the TED Talks.
yeah, with
Where are they?
what's his name? It's
They were a
the
little bit above. I think it's higher than that.
Yeah, it's higher.
Yeah.
It's above that.
I skipped things.
Ken Robinson.
Yeah, Ken
Okay.
Robinson, yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah,
He was
okay,
great.
that was a weird thing. Now, you got a chance to see all three of those?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Tell me about what you thought of.
I thought it was great. His oratory and just use of words was on point, and just his way about describing everything and just the terms he used, it was great. And he's a very funny guy as well.
Very humorous.
He's
very
in a
humorous,
wonderful
yeah.
way.
And that also adds
Eagleton
on.
does the same thing in very
Mhm.
similar way.
Yeah.
And of course, Robinson, it would be nice to find an American who can do that kind of thing,
Yeah.
wouldn't
Yeah.
it? But we
Would.
find ourselves falling into that same conclusion that Eagleton posits, that you sort of need to have that literary history behind you in order to provide it that way. It's not really true. You listen to, I think probably the best American we found is Berlinski, and he does a wonderful job, although it's rarely as humorous as these others. Okay, there were three of them here. Ken Robinson spoke about two of them, and of course I like Ken Robinson. He's a Liverpudlian, which, by the way, is the adjectival version of somebody from Liverpool, and which means that his dialect would be Scouse, which actually is defined. It was something that Eagleton mentioned, was Englishmen can tell the difference between a Texan and a New Englander, but Americans have no concept of the difference between someone who speaks Geordie and Brummie, which are they've never even heard of them. But what this does mean, however, about Ken Robinson's language is that the language he speaks is not the language he grew up with. Sure. Indeed, he, as is the case with so many products of English schools, ended up adopting an accent from school rather than from home. And his is fairly close to the standard RP English, because if he spoke that which he grew up with, he'd sound like the Beatles, which is as far from his language as anything we speak in this country. Anyway, that was interesting. What about the final one, this panel discussion? Interesting people on there whom you already knew, right?
I actually didn't get a chance to see that one. I only saw the first two.
Okay.
Where we talked about college and education and that.
Right. Well, I'm not sure how important that one is, because the language isn't necessarily universally wonderful. But the panel was fascinating. The panel was Ken Robinson was on the panel, as was Murray Gell-Mann. You remember him, the physicist from Caltech. Yes. Who else was on the panel? Did you see him?
It was Dalai Lama and
another scientist. I can't remember his name.
And
the Blue Men, whatever that their group was, and Eckhart Tolle. Now, this is interesting. Dalai Lama, of course, a major figure I'm sure you've all heard about, and his language is nothing to emulate. Indeed, he always has a translator sitting next to him, who does a wonderful job with English. But also, Tolle is a wonderful find. I've read a lot of what the Dalai Lama has written, but I think I've read all of what Tolle's written, or at least listened to it, because one of the wonderful finds that I enjoy when I discover is a good writer who reads his own audiobooks. There are some who do that, and listening to a brilliant writer voice his own words, I find is a wonderful insight into the language and the meaning.
Yeah.
And there's some people who Hitchens does, and Fry does, but Tolle does even more so, in the sense that English is his third language, and he speaks English brilliantly, but he does audiobooks in all three. He does his own audiobooks in English, German, and Spanish. And it's just marvelous to turn it on and listen to someone who can do that. He's a well, I'd call a spiritual teacher, I suppose, in the similar sense to the Dalai Lama and so many others. He references a lot of Christian material, but a lot of other material from other sources as well. So I just thought I'd mention that. He's an interesting character. He only speaks on there for, I don't know, maybe 5 or 10 minutes. But he makes some good points. Okay.
But yeah, as we we should probably add some more TED Talks.
Okay, I looked, to tell you the truth, I looked through TED Talks. I couldn't find that much.
Really?
I was listening to a number of them, and they're interesting, but they're not necessarily the kind of language that I would like to find. I have one TED Talk that I did put up here because I suspect that I may have to reload my page in order to make that appear. And it's one that I mentioned before, and I give you a quote from it. And we agreed that I should put it up here, but then I found I apparently didn't see it anywhere.
Mhm.
And so I did put it in, but I think I put it in after I sent this thing out. All right, where is it? There it is. Raul Martinez. We are out of time now. This thing is about 10 minutes long. That wouldn't work for you folks, or would it?
I could always watch it when I
think
get
so,
home.
Yeah, I'll probably just watch it later.
Okay. But let's just watch 1 minute of. We've got 1
Yep.
minute. This is a TED Talk, but by all means, if you can look through TED Talks and find talks that are worth listening to, please do so and tell me what they are. Especially if you can find Americans who can talk.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Am I not getting any sound?
Yeah, I don't think so.
Oh, crumbs. Oh, okay. I found it.
We do not choose to exist. We do not choose what environment we grow up in. The people we become, the lives that we lead, the beliefs and values that we learn to hold, owe much to the lottery of our birth. Our starting point in life is one of complete dependence on forces, genetic and environmental, that we don't control. These forces can shape us into many things. In fact, human history would suggest there's neither a belief too bizarre nor an action too appalling for humans to embrace given the necessary cultural influences. This simple idea has profound implications for our personal and political freedom. Imagine two enemies on a battlefield. Let's say an Israeli and a Palestinian. Suppose we could go back in time and swap them at birth, so that each would be raised in the other's culture. In time, would each not end up fighting for the other side? A different flag, a different religion, a different ideology. This outcome would certainly surprise no one. It seems like common sense. But the implications are significant. We're readily admitting that the deepest convictions of these two individuals are, in a sense, arbitrary. Go back to the moment of your own birth. What kind of person could you be today with a different starting point in life? Clearly, you don't choose when, where, or to whom you're born. You don't choose to be born a Muslim or a Christian, rich or poor, into a war zone or a peaceful suburb. So think of all the human cultures that have ever existed that you could have been born into. A Maasai tribe, medieval England, fascist Germany. And with each one, what could you have ended up believing, fighting for, defending?
Okay. You get the point.
It's a
Yeah.
T here.
He speaks beautifully.
Mhm.
I wish that's the only thing he's done online, as far as I can tell. There's an interview besides that. He's actually a portrait painter,
Oh, wow.
and he's actually painted the Dalai Lama, among other people. This is interesting. When I started looking him up, that's such a common name. I thought I mixed him up with somebody else. Turns out the same guy. But of course, he's brought up young. He does present it very nicely, and he brings up some big questions, really big questions. What do we owe to the lenses that are imposed upon us, and are we capable of standing back and managing to understand things? Many people can watch this comfortably and say, "I agree with everything he's saying," but still, my ideas are better than everybody else's. You see what I
Yeah.
mean?
What's his conclusion, Dennis? At the end of his presentation, what does he say?
Let's.
I mean, you-
This is a a promotion of a film. And so the
Okay.
film, of course, presents a great deal more. But his conclusion really is that it's difficult but possible for us to manage to see the world through the eyes of others, or at least divest ourselves of the lens that's been affixed to us by culture.
How do you explain individuals from the same family who take two diverse political opinions?
Perfect example of one of the ones that we've been watching all the way
American
through.
Civil War.
Oh, indeed. No, absolutely. But the question is, I think the question I have to ask, he doesn't actually put it this way, is if I find myself believing exactly what I was brought up with, that should hint that I should perhaps rethink it. If I find myself having switched to something else, deliberately, intentionally, and cognitively, then perhaps I don't have to really rethink that one. But if I have by default fallen into the nurture that has been inflicted upon me, then perhaps I need that.
Then why do liberal colleges right now stifle freedom of expression and exchange of ideas?
I can't answer that one. Stifling freedom of expression and exchange of ideas is always something I would oppose.
But society is dictating that in universities. Stanford's a big example.
One of the big questions is what should one be allowed to consider? And indeed, I think one should be allowed to consider.
At Stanford right now, the student body is against students who want to have original writings of the founding fathers of this country. They call them bigots and bastards and everything else. They're
Well, you'll
stifling
notice that all of that's up in our classroom right now.
Yeah. So it's interesting.
But if you're going to read it, you have to realize that that's a mixed bag too. You will find among you know what? I clicked myself out of my agenda.
Oops.
Interference.
When you read Jefferson and Paine and Adams and so forth, you'll find some very interesting things there too
Yes, you will.
that take you off in other completely different directions.
Absolutely.
But indeed, that's one of the things that they are pushing so much right now in source documents in Common Core. And so,
Certain source documents, not all.
no,
The sources,
not-
the sources that will,
that's one of the things that I object to is their Common Core, for the most part, chooses good things. It doesn't choose enough of them. It limits what is being done.
you talk to your wife about Common Core. It's not
Well,
easy.
no, I'm not talking now about math. I'm talking about their suggested reading list, for example. There's nothing on the reading list that's bad. The things that aren't on the reading list, I would miss.
Okay, back to your class, sorry. for the
I'm sorry, I'm
interruption.
keeping them over, and all of these people have places to go, so I'm gonna have to bring things to an end.
That's fine.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. We didn't really decide.
Oh, right.
We talked about more TED Talk lectures, and I said I wasn't able to find more good ones. If you can find good ones, please do so.
Yes.
And bring
I'll
them in.
look in other sources as well, like Google or something like that.
Right. Well, one of the things we could do, we haven't really done a great deal of, is look for lectures presented at MIT and Princeton and so forth. And there are also the Oxford Union debates. And so let's see what we can find
All
there.
right, sounds good. Figure something out. All right, see you next week. Have a good week.
Have a good
Thank
week.
you.
Okay. Ending class, the college prep English class for homeschoolers at Excellence in Education. See you next week.